Welcome to the Lifting the Lid Social Care Stories. I'm Simon Ray, CEO of Hamptons Resourcing, and in this series, we uncover the mysteries of social care management. From fostering to dementia care, we'll explore diverse roles and management levels with guests who bring expertise, passion, and real-world stories to each conversation.
I mean, in a nutshell, I've always wanted to do a podcast with senior managers within children's and adult services. You know, it's a sector I'm really passionate around, and I know a lot of people are interested in that sector as well. And I think a lot of people feel that social care is shrouded in mystery. And certainly some of the senior management roles and middle management roles in local authorities are shrouded in mystery as well. And I think the role of the DCS and the role of the DAS, the Director of Children's Services and Director of Adult Social Services, is one of those roles that is shrouded in mystery. And when we speak to a lot of middle managers or managers that are up and coming within social care or on that journey, they're always really interested in what a Director of Children's Services does, how they do it and why they do it, and the reasons that they got into it and made that step change from maybe an operational manager to a more strategic manager. So nothing too scary. I've just got a couple of questions around that to kind of hear your hear your voice, hear your own thoughts on it. Thank you for agreeing to speak with us today. Obviously, this is a series of conversations that I've always wanted to do in a sector that I'm hugely passionate about. So talking about a sector that most people probably don't understand the mechanics of and what a Director of Children's Services actually does. So I think people would be really interested to hear what you do, how you do it, and the thought process behind some of those answers. So if that's okay with you, Paul, I think we'll start with you telling me exactly what you do and where do you do it.
Okay, so I'm Paul Marshall, Strategic Director for Children Education Services for Manchester. So in my responsibilities, I have all things children's social care, youth justice, and all things schools facing.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. So tell me a little bit about your own career path and how you became to be the Director of Children's Services in Manchester City Council.
Goodness. Yeah, I always feel it's a little bit by default. It wasn't, I never had what I would call a naked ambition. So I never set out at the start of my social work career to think I'd like to be a Director of Children's Services. And in fact, I think I started out, Richard Jones was the director, I think, of adults and children's when I was in Lancashire.
Okay.
And they talked in a very, or he talked in a very different language to what I did as a team manager and as a social worker. And you thought, I could never be one of those people.
Mm.
So it's quite interesting, really. So I qualified in 1992.
Mm-hmm.
Started working as a social worker in Halton, which at that point
Oh,
was
yeah.
part of Cheshire. A small unitary over Liverpool Way, Runcorn and Widnes. I left Halton to go to Stockport as a team manager. So that was my first team management post.
Yeah.
I learned loads in lots of things in terms of management of people and staff. They were a really disfranchised group of staff, really, in lots of ways. And I relied on what I learned from my team managers, what they modelled. And I think that it's one of the important things I'd probably at some point loop back to about you learn lots of things from just observing and being part of something. And I was fortunate in Halton to be a good team. Left Stockport, went to Lancashire, and in Lancashire I did 3 roles: team manager, service lead, and an area manager for Preston, Fylde and Wire up that coast. Left Lancashire, went to Knowsley as a children's services manager, which was a quasi AD actually in lots of ways. I was responsible for all operational services, but I had a strategic director sat above me and then the DCS. And then I left there to go to Birmingham as an assistant director for the south part of Birmingham as an AD, went to Rochdale as an AD, and then from Rochdale into Manchester. So always predominantly in the northwest, a bit in the Midlands, but always having one eye to sort of constantly being challenged and stretched all the way. And that's probably the biggest motivator for me. I've always had to be challenged, and I've always had to be driven. So it's a bit of a point when you think you've done as much as you can do, think about what's the next challenge, but it's never been a naked ambition.
Okay, brilliant. And it's interesting you mentioned there about team managers. So, you know, we work with a lot of team managers, and I think the team manager is one of the roles that, you know, people are at that stepping stone, you know, to move on with their senior management career or stay potentially as a team manager, which I think sometimes is one of the hardest roles in a social care team. You know, you've got the pressures of senior management, but you've got also obviously the day-to-day casework of social workers as well. What made you push on and say, right, okay, I'm going to move from that team manager role into a more strategic senior management role? What was the catalyst?
So if I could just step one back, the reason I moved from social worker to team manager was at that time you worked with families, you didn't work with children. So we worked with about 20 families.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I'm not a bad social worker. What could I do? I think there's lots of people much better than me, actually. But what could I do? And I could do more if I was a team manager. So the impact. So it was always about impact. And so I moved from social worker to team manager with that view, you know, working with 200 families as it would be, is roughly about that now. What I've always seen, and probably one of the, as an observation, what I see, and I think it's interesting you touch on that, is that team managers tend to get very focused on practice and they're very practice driven. What I don't see, and we try and do this in Manchester now, is give them opportunities to be a bit more strategic, look a bit more outward facing, and start to develop their strategic thinking. So why I then made the step from team manager to service manager, which I did in Lancashire. So at that time it was family support. So it's that middle piece of not duty, the middle bit, because we all call them different things. And I had 3 team managers, and then it was always about impact. So actually think about the breadth I could do, and then doing some service development. I worked with a woman called Carolyn on youth justice, that relationship between children's services, youth justice, that bit around then how do I develop the service to be even more and start thinking teams, systems, processes. That was the bit that started to interest me, and some of the partnership work. And I think when you start to, at team managers start looking out, that's the bit that starts to get exciting, because in my nature I'd probably say I like making things, is probably the best way I could describe it. So creating things better than what they are has been something always that I've always done when I look back over my childhood into adulthood, is I like making things, although I'm awful at DIY. So there's an irony in that.
Yeah, well, that's, you know, you like making things happen by the sounds of it, and I think in a role that has those responsibilities, you need to make things happen, and things, you know, as you said earlier, they just need to get done, which is true. So we'll come on to that a little bit later, because I've got a question around that. But the next thing I wanted to understand is, the Director of Children's Services, as I kind of understand it, has professional and responsibility for leadership. I think it's strategy, effectiveness of a local authority children's services, if you look at the statutory guidelines on the government website. So to anyone who isn't from a local authority background, what does that mean in layman's terms?
So I try and articulate my role as sort of, it's probably 3 bits really. I always say, you know, have one eye on practice, that clear line of sight from the director through to the front line. And that's just, so your numbers, your performance is you're looking at numbers, but with a critical eye to lead into a series of questions to understand why is it good, why is it not good, etc., etc. And engaging with staff and your quality assurance. So practice is always the thing, you know, and I always say in plain language, I'm likely to be sacked for practice than I am for strategy. So always my first priority is looking at practice and engaging with staff and making sure the conditions are right for your staff. The next bit then I think is partnerships, making sure that you've got good partnerships right across the board. So one of the things when I went into Manchester, I used to say, tongue in cheek, I must have kept the coffee shops open in Manchester for the first 12 months, because you can do so much more. And I learned a lot of that on reflection from Howard Bernstein, actually, who was the chief exec at the time. Because when I used to go to the management meetings, I used to go and the decisions were kind of done because all the work was done outside the meeting. So your best work is never done in a meeting. Your best work's done outside of the meeting, because you're not on no agendas. You're building relationships. You're gaining understanding, and without the pressure of getting through agendas. So I spent a long time with some of the key partners, and I could probably come back to what I would say was the impact of that that's carried us forward. And then, of course, your strategy. And I spent years, I think strategy is a lovely word, because I spent years trying to work out what's this mystery of strategy. And I think social workers actually are blessed by nature and what they do, probably to be good at strategy more than they realise. And the reason being, strategy is a vision, ambition, and a plan how we're going to get there. If I took that back down to basic social work practice, that's what social workers do. We have a child protection plan with some key aims and objectives, and then you have your core group and your children's, child protection plan, how we're going to get to the point where they're safe. Strategy. But I spent years trying to understand this mystery
trying to
word.
decipher the word strategy.
And we do, don't we? A strategic thinker, or I only do strategy and stuff like that. And you're thinking, and I spent years trying to understand it. And actually, what it means is, where are we going, and how are we going to get there? And it's no more complicated than that.
Yeah, makes sense. So that leads me on really well. Segues into the next question. So I think local authorities are bound by some 200 plus statutory duties covering education, children's social care, which is huge, absolutely huge. So how do you manage all of those services that come under your jurisdiction?
So I think there's probably two ways, because of course in many ways you move out of management to leadership, don't you? Because management's making sure you do the right things well, and leadership's making sure you what's it? I'm trying to think of the phrase actually. Is it leadership's doing the right things and management's doing the things right, if that makes sense? So I think there's two bits. So the first thing I think is, on all those 200 and odd, is working out which ones are critically important, because they're all related to something. If you go back to the leadership point around something that we should be doing, and we should be doing well. So we have always put a performance framework in about those key bits, or actually some bits whereby they're not even in the indicator. So some I look at, some I don't look at. And I always look at them in buckets. I don't look at them as individuals. So best example of that is, so when I look at the front door of children's services, I look at contacts, referrals, assessments, repeat assessments, and the other bits, because when you look at them all together, it gives you a sense of what's happening at your front door, as opposed to, are your assessments on time, as opposed to how many contacts and referrals you've had, and then repeats. They all point to each other. And then what I then do, when it's sort of put your framework together, is then spend time with staff. But I never talk in the language of your assessments aren't on time. It might come into the conversation, but I always relate it back to, what does that mean for a child? You know, and I think that's really important, because in that scenario, what it means is we don't truly understand what that child's needs. So your assessment may run on and on and on, which basically means, in the worst case scenario, children could be at risk and we're not spotting it for a long period of time. And practitioners want to understand practice. They talk in the language of practice, not in the language of numbers and indicators. And if you start talking in that way, that's what they expect you to do. So what you've got to do is talk in the language of practice, which for the likes of me is being clear about what those indicators are telling you. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah, absolutely, yeah. I think get the language right, and then the vision becomes clear. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we did, if I go back to the very early days in Manchester when we were inadequate, and we ended up with a bit of a strapline of safe, effective and efficient. And there was two bits really. We were talking to political leaders, I was talking to other senior leaders and managers, but I was also talking to practitioners. So the safe bit is making sure, first and foremost, children are safe in Manchester.
Mm.
The second bit then is, if we're going to do something, let's do it properly, let's be effective. And then the third bit was the efficient bit. Let's make it this is as efficient as possible. Stop doing things twice over if you don't have to. And
Yeah.
if we can save money, which was the budget stuff, then
Yeah,
let's
important.
take inefficient stuff out. Well, yes. And that carried us for quite some time because it spoke to everybody.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, thank you. And then, so the DCS role has huge responsibilities across children's services, obviously education. So looking into the role, if you were a social worker or a team manager, what would a day in the life of a DCS consist of? So how does your day, how does your structure look like? When you wake up in the morning, what do you have to do? Do you do the same thing every day, or is every day completely different, or is it just absolute chaos every day?
My wife says to me, if I didn't live with you, I wouldn't have a clue what you do. She's in the profession as
Absolutely.
well. And I think it's right. And interesting, and we do have some staff who want to shadow myself and Sean as a deputy, or in fact, I met with a young care experience young people 2 weeks ago, and he wants to shadow me because people are intrigued. What does a DCS do?
Absolutely intrigued.
And yeah, and I think on the face of it, it's probably meetings and emails. That's basically what you do all day,
Yeah.
every day.
Yeah.
However, if I then break that down, and I probably could throw up today's meeting, I think what you're really doing is influencing, shaping. In meetings, and I'll probably pull a day up. If you pick, not this week because it's election week, but if you pick a day, I'll pull the diary up and I'll talk you through the diary. That might be another way of going through. But so certainly meetings and conversations with people, which is your shape, influencing networks, getting people to sort of shared sense of thoughts. And I'll give you a good example. And then of course, when you're in the meeting, you're either making decisions. You're either, if you like, building a strategy, vision, ambition, and getting people behind all that to agree what their contributions are.
Yeah.
But it all sounds quite simple. But so if I took, been doing an awful lot of work. So this year, I always start off with personal challenges. What would I want to achieve? So this year was about our Children Young People's Plan was due for a refresh 2025. And I wanted to do a little bit more on our Directorate Children Education Services, our contribution and plans, and then get much closer to the NHS colleagues. And I use it very loosely because we have ICBs at Trust, but I think just use the term NHS because it's just easier. Because it's a safer way. You don't offend anybody by getting it wrong.
Yeah.
I meet with I spent an awful lot of time in NHS meetings because the first bit is investing in them. We've all got our own priorities. So I spend a lot of time with NHS, or I have done this year. So they know I'm interested in their priorities and what I can bring and offer to them.
Yeah.
I then meet with key partners outside. So usually I arrive in Manchester Oxford Road about 7:30 in the morning. People start to arrive, colleagues around. We all have sort of patterns, and we usually go and get a coffee in the morning, just chat a bit like we did prior to this. Talk a bit of football when it's safe to, just chat around, and then we'll start talking about work, shared ideas, and ambitions. And we've moved to a place of very fragmented relationship. We get into meetings and we've got a joint commissioning board now. I can be a bit angsty, so I'm very clear about, if we're going to go into a meeting, let's be purposeful and focused while we're in there. And I think that's the other bit, is meetings aren't just a place to just go through an agenda. You should always be clear about what you want out of that meeting and what you're going to contribute. Otherwise, you might as well just not bother. And we've agreed 4 areas of priority that will serve children in Manchester really, really well. And they are looking at we have family hubs. We've one of the trailblazers that early help hubs, health visiting, school health advisors, and how do we bring all that together in terms of what we would call proportionate universalism. In other words, some families don't really need much. The likes, I will make an assumption, Simon, you and I might need a letter to get down to the clinic. The barrier for us tends to be work rather than recognizing the importance of vaccinations, immunizations, health and development. Some of our families, though, need a lot more help than that. And my experience as a practitioner, some good health visitors will get right alongside a family and put them in the car and take them to the clinic, or we'll go out. If we take universalism in its broader sense from the health visitor perspective, everybody gets the same. And the proportionate universalism is the bit something, it's a Manchester sort of narrative really, is that some people need more than others, but it's still a universal offer. And it takes you back to the family healthy child program. So we've agreed that, and then a few other bits about how we'll do that, and that's helped us get I would, on a spend of 20 million, about 6.9 million contribution from NHS to children with really complex needs, because we've got a shared understanding. I wouldn't have achieved any of that in a meeting. So some of that is the network, some of that is part, and then the work is done in the meeting to finish it off. Bit of a long answer.
No, that's okay. That's fine. So I think from there, I think for a lot of people, that the pressures of a job in a senior management in social care, with so many families under the care and so many children under the care, of a local authority. So how does that make you feel? Obviously, when you go home at night. Like I'm sure lots of social workers do, team managers, service managers, heads of service, assistant directors. How does that make you feel, knowing that those families and the children within those families are your responsibility, or the care of the local authority?
This might sound a strange answer, because I don't think of it that way, because I think if you allowed that to get into your brains, well, I think if you allow that to get into your mind, it'd probably paralyze you. So in Manchester, about 125,000 children school age. Social care work with about 5,500 who are in need of some sort of help, support, or protection, whatever it may be. If I allowed that thought to creep into my mind, I'd probably be paralyzed, because it's scary.
Completely.
What does get into my mind is, and I think that I didn't talk about email, I always think about turning decisions around quickly, because at the end of that decision is a child. And I think what does creep into my mind is making sure systems and processes and people's thoughts are in the right place. So if you're a practitioner, if you're thinking about doing the right things by a family, following due process, making sure you've responded to children's needs in a way as best you could and accounted for that, that's okay. And if there are things that are preventing you to do that well, either you've got too much work, or the system's not working properly, i.e. the IT system, or it's not very functional, those are my problems. So everything I look at is to make sure social workers, team managers particularly, are very clear about roles, responsibilities, and how they can do the right things by children, young people. And I always say, if you were frustrated by something and you weren't getting the response from your manager, I'd want to know. I might pick that up later, but principally, because key to all of this is a social worker having, or a support worker, whoever they may be, having the right amount of work that's manageable, and being able to do the very best, which means resources, equipment, time, supervision, guidance, all those kind of things are critically important. That's my focus. Is enabling them to do that. And when they haven't, understanding why not. And sometimes that's a direct challenge. I'm quite visible and I'm quite approachable either, and that means sometimes staff will put you straight, and that's okay, because if we all want the same thing, improve children's lives, then that means we've all got to be open to challenge and or getting it right for children, and it's never always comfortable.
Yeah, I can imagine not, and sometimes.
Yeah.
So that leads me on to, it's really clear that in the short time I've known, that you're really passionate around children's services, that you're passionate about the sector you work in. I don't think anyone could do the job you do, or any job in social care, if they weren't passionate. But how do you maintain that passion? How do you maintain that motivation despite the often stressful and emotionally taxing nature of the work that you do on a day-to-day basis?
I've never really thought about it in that way. I guess, and it's a bit like our conversation at sort of earlier on about drive and driven. Um, I've always been, I suppose, I've never thought it in a conscious way, but I always think it links to the last question, that we have children who look to us to do the right thing by them. For whatever reason, the circumstances means they can't. And I best describe that is that a politician said to me once, Paul, you really sort of like, shout up for children with disabilities or kids who are at risk. And I said, you're right. I says, but if we don't, then who does? And I think it's very easy to forget or not see some of the children, because there's such small numbers on the scheme of things. And I think that's what social workers do. And I challenge any social worker who doesn't have that drive, ambition and passion for what they do. And if they don't, they might find themselves either very unhappy or in the wrong profession, because it's a call in this. These aren't jobs, they're a calling. Whatever level you're at, it's a calling. What distinguishes me in what I do from a practitioner is just the scope and level of responsibility, but with that comes huge opportunity to try and make things better, to try and do things on a bigger scale, and that's a gift. So I don't see it as a burden, I see it as a gift, really.
I understand that. So, and then I imagine over the years you've had lots of moments, lots of points, lots of things that have really impacted your life, and have kind of stood out to you. But and there's probably hundreds and hundreds of different stories, different scenarios. I just wondered if there's anything that's really, any story that you could share with us that's stood out, where you thought it's had a real meaningful impact on the lives of children and families, that's kind of really stood out to you.
I guess you're right, really. I'm trying to think of something hugely massive, but I think the most impactful story tends to come from individual children, because you can see the direct correlation, and you can always scale things up. So I think the one more recent was, and this goes back to that conversation about an opportunity and a gift. So every year we do, like most local authorities, we do our achievement awards for looked after children care leavers, where we celebrate their successes, no matter how great or small it may appear. Every achievement for these kids is huge, and we celebrate them. In Manchester, we're fortunate we have the Lord Mayor, which is very regal. They have the chains, they have the robes and all this, and it is very, it's very regal and stuff, and the kids love it. And this year or last year, Yasmin Dar was our Lord Mayor for Manchester, and we did the awards. We gave the awards out, and one of the young people come up to me at the end and said, "I didn't get my certificate." There's always and of course, huge failure. And I said, right, leave it with me. And I emailed his personal assistant and said, look, I'm going to arrange for him to go and meet Yasmin in her parlour. So it's a big building. You imagine Manchester, big, that Hogwarts
regal
building.
Surrounding. Pretty impressive.
Absolutely. And I arranged for him, and now initially didn't engage with me,
right?
And I think that, and this is the social worker in me, that's because he didn't expect the likes of me to be interested in him, and he didn't expect that I would go and do something more or follow through.
Yeah.
The likes of me, and I think it's an important message, is that you don't just say things for the sake of it. That political statement, but you never follow through.
Yeah.
But so he was used to rejection, but I
Okay.
hunted him down through his PA, and I arranged with Yasmin for him to go over and meet her.
Yeah.
And get his certificate. And then we were doing child friendly work in Manchester, so we'd put a goodie bag together for him, and he went over, and Rachel went with him as his PA, and it's on Instagram, actually. It's just life changing for him.
Wow.
And that will stay with him forever.
Yeah.
And the point of all of that is, and it goes back to my earlier point, is in these jobs there's a gift. So through my connections and relationships, roles, status, here we'd got something wrong for a child, but turn it into something even bigger and better for him through my connection with the Lord Mayor.
Yeah.
The ability to make that happen,
Mm.
and knowing that will stay with him probably for the best part of his life, really.
Yeah.
And that wasn't about me. I think that's the best way I can describe it, is you can change lives in a way that you probably never truly understand, in the same way social workers do, actually.
Yeah.
And that's probably one of the more recent stories, being able to do. The other one, I would say, a bit more strategic. So through the network in the business sector, I spoke to a local business person, and well, I could give you two stories on that, where our kids may not go skiing. So kids in care, because it's, what is it, about £1,000 plus to go skiing.
Yeah.
We did work with a charity in Manchester, and we've taken 10 kids through skiing, and there's a program to go through. 3 of them will go off to, I think it's Italy, skiing. I think they're actually there. Well, be just finishing, and there may well be an apprenticeship at the end of it, to be a ski instructor type person. And it costs us, did a bit with charities, and that's just great. You're just given that chance. And the final bit, I say, we had a relationship with Pretty Little Things, where we do clothing events for care leavers. So it's fashion, Boohoo and Pretty Little Things, fashion for kids that they just love. So they have to bring stuff because it's obviously all disposable, but we do clothing events so we use that to engage children in things around education, employment, training, health. So over the weekend they come down, but they all get like pretty much a brand new outfit. They go around, have it all on rails, because it's their it's their sample sale stuff.
Right.
So they donate boxes and boxes, and every quarter we put one of these sessions together. Saves money for them. It's really exciting. We engage with them on a different level about things that ordinarily we may struggle, and of course you build some wonderful relationships with these kids. And I think that's what these jobs give you. Those are just the things, and it all goes back to opportunities, and it's something I'd be remiss not to say. And my mum used to say to me as a kid growing up, she said, Paul, everyday opportunities present, and all you've got to decide is which one to take. And I'd leave you with that thought.
That's a great answer, Paul. Thank you. I think there's another conversation there about delving into why you would do that for that young person. Not a lot of people would go not that extra mile, but not a lot of people would think like that. There's something inherent in your nature as a senior manager, someone in social care, that would want to do that little thing for someone that would make a huge difference to their lives. And I think that is probably the reason why you're in the job you're in, because some people would not see that small detail. They wouldn't have just picked that out, but you clearly did, as something that you knew it would make a big impact. And I think that's the essence for me of why lots of people within a similar role to you in social care are in those roles, because they inherently care.
Well, my short answer to that is that they're but for the grace of God. Humility comes into that. I often and many times think that in a different set of circumstances, then that could easily be me, could be you.
Of course.
We're not predisposed, and I just think that we would all do well to remember that.
Well said. So that leads on again really nice. The kind of my next question is, And I think you've probably answered it in a really articulate way, in a better way, I think, than I need to ask you the question again. But what do you consider the most rewarding aspect about the role of the DCS?
It's certainly not paying conditions, contrary to popular belief. No, I think it's that bit, Sam. I think you're right. I think it's the ability to do things and change lives in a way that no other profession can. And I think that's all the way through all our education system, and our schools. I see teaching a far better teaching arrangements for children now than the one I had. I was one of those kids, actually, Marshall, you'll never amount to nothing, and that's true.
Wow.
School was a bit of a playground for me. It probably, I never missed a day, but you probably wished I had. And that's my bit around. Yeah. And I see, the teaching profession, can have such a profound impact on children's lives in a way that we probably don't appreciate, and good teachers recognize that. And it's the same for social workers. You can change children's lives in a way that you probably don't realize. And I gave the and a DCS role has the ability, that unique ability, to reach right across all of those things, but always being sighted on the individual. They're not homogenous. They're all very different, and you can touch lives in a way that people just probably wouldn't truly appreciate, and that's a gift. And as I said before, that's a blessing and a gift that we have to remind ourselves of.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's a great answer, Paul. So I think the next thing I wanted to kind of ask you is around the evolvement of the role of a DCS over the next 10 years. Obviously, as a previous winner, and obviously the banner in the background there in the Achievement Awards for the MJ Innovation, good plugging, Innovation in Children's and Adult Services, which I had the pleasure of presenting to you. So innovation, obviously collaboration and technology is huge now within local authorities, and I think is becoming more and more key to the growth and obviously the success of local authorities, and particularly in social care. How do you think that innovation, how do you think the role of of what you do will evolve with the technology and also the local authority setting over the next 10 years?
Wow. I don't think I've ever given myself time to think about 10 years ahead. although I'll probably be well retired. I think I'd start off with, it's interesting, because those are interesting, really. What I worry about is the ever presence of regulatory and I think my fear is the regulatory frameworks and the likes will strangle innovation and creativity out of the system. And I make no secret of, I spoke to my regional director and said, that the presence of the regulator, which says, and I value the role of Ofsted as our regulator, and that's not what I'm saying. But we can very easily spend lots of time thinking, what would Ofsted make of this? How will the regulator judge that? Now, I think there is some shift and change in all of that, but it worries me if we get and allow the regulator to start driving practice. And I think they kind of sometimes step into that space. And when you're a failing authority, which we have been in Manchester, it's very difficult to find your way now into the space to innovate and be creative and collaborate in the way that we have. So I contextualize it in that way, particularly as budgets get more and more challenged, particularly as resources become more and more precious, and you get a 12-month budget rather than a 3-year settlement and stuff like that. And that's a real worry for me, because it strangles, like I say, innovation, creativity. Looking to the future, though, I think, if you like, IT, there's some real opportunities. I mean, in Manchester, we're just working with one of the suppliers around tech speak,
Okay.
And it's been around for a long time. I mean,
Mm.
it's it's interesting how we adapted to Teams meetings, wasn't it, on the back of the pandemic? But they were always
Yep.
there,
Had to.
FaceTime and the likes. So I would like to think AI. So we're piloting a little bit on AI.
Mhm.
Could it make our report writing a little bit more succinct, a bit more snappy? That allows more time, if we get it right, for practitioners to do practice,
Yeah.
because we are a human service. It's all about human contact and engagement. And I think if tech can free practitioners up truly with good quality tech and hardware, then actually there's a massive opportunity to create space for practitioners to spend more time with families, to do the things that they need to do, to engage. So, like I say, we're piloting some sort of tech speak tech, which we'll review in the next few weeks to see how it goes. We're going to do a bit of a short pilot.
Mm.
Similarly on AI in terms of reports, you'll never move away from the fact that I think you've got to check it as the author and the human, if you like.
Yeah.
But I think it's, if we get it right, it's hugely enabling.
Yeah.
So our innovation and collaboration is where, and the collaboration bit then has a spin-off. One of the things that I'm keen to do is when we do a contract with a supplier,
Mhm.
then what's the social value element of that?
Yeah.
And really eking that out, either because young people can help shape, develop and influence it, get young people involved in that, learn some skills, probably more tech savvy than the likes of me. In fact, not more likely, absolutely, definitely more tech savvy. Gives them skills, builds their confidence, so it creates, and these are highly paid jobs if we get them right. So that's a huge opportunity for them. But I do think, remembering what the job role's about, but actually there is some huge opportunities, and 10 years is probably not that far away, really.
No, blink of an eye. Absolutely. You've mentioned there, obviously technology. You've mentioned kind of loosely social media and the technology that the young people now are using, and we see obviously now the use of social media widely and hugely. With young people as they grow up, and from 3, 4, 5 years old. How do you prioritize your own mental health and well-being in a role that is so stressful and so full on?
I guess I think it is about making sure you create the space and time for yourself and your family, because I will say that I might be the front of all of this, but actually my family also contribute and pay the price.
Mhm.
And it's interesting on the tech stuff. So I have to be really, really conscious. My wife will say to the kids, really resent the fact I'm always on the phone, and
Yeah.
they spot it. So
Yep.
what I have to do, and we try and spend a bit of time with it, like father and daughter time, father and son time, where it's just me and them, and
Yeah.
the phone doesn't come out and it can be confiscated from me. So we have some private jokes, but they understand what the job is, what it entails, and why we do what we do. And there
Yeah.
is a bit around educating them that actually, I earn a decent salary, and we all benefit from that.
Mhm.
But we all have to pay a little bit of a price. So it means we can go and do things where maybe we don't have to think about if I was earning less money.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for them to understand that. But equally, so it's creating the space for yourselves. And then the other bit is, for me, is the things that I take a lot of pleasure from, that I make sure I do, and I create that space for it. So I
Yeah.
like running, I like going to the gym,
Yep.
and I like music and stuff like that. And of course, I create space for that, and then discipline is probably the third bit, I would say.
Mm.
So there was a time. So I talked about my career early on. There was a time when when I worked in Knowsley, travelling distance from home. So, and at the time, actually, I used to have underground parking in the office. So you used to drive from home, go into the parking, get the lift up to your room, come down, and I still went to the gym, but I still put weight on because I was in early, and it's true. I was in early. Part of my eating habits, actually, but I was in early, and then I'd finish late. So, and
Right.
what
Yeah.
happened was, days were running into the nights were running into the days, the weekends into the weeks.
Yeah.
But when I went to Birmingham, I stayed in Birmingham from Monday to Thursday, which meant I was on the train out of Birmingham New Street at 3 p.m. I arrived home at 6 o'clock and the laptop never came out in all that time. And I learned by, if like, enforced really that the importance of that weekend with me and the family. So you can have me in the week because actually there's not much time left over, but the weekends is for me and my family. And I've, since leaving Birmingham and through Birmingham, I've always stayed to that principle. Once I get off the train from Manchester, it stays off. Unless there's something, occasionally like you've got an inspection on, that's just how
really
it is.
Stuff.
But I think that discipline is absolutely essential because these are jobs that just consume, your life, and there's always more to be done. You'll never get to the end of it.
No, it's always going to be there tomorrow, is it? I think I personally need to take a leaf out of your book. I think my children see me with my phone attached to my hand, looking at it, emails, looking at text messages, or nowadays even WhatsApp messages from candidates and clients. So you can never escape it really, unless, as you say, you choose to escape it. And I think that's a conscious decision that you need to choose to escape the pressures of work and the communication and the bombardment of information by just turning it off. But that is difficult. I understand that is difficult for a lot of people.
And to be honest, Simon, I mean, it's similar but different professions. My niece, I think we all live in a world now where it's instant. Years back, wasn't it? It was, carbon paper and a memo, and you get a week before you got a response. Whereas we expect an instant response, particularly with social media. And I see it. My niece works, private industry, and it's not much different there. The public sector's no different. But it was my wife who reminded me. She said the kids hate going out with you because that phone is always in your hand. So we kind of have some rules whereby you strike the balance. If we go out for the day, is that sort of like, I'll just slip off and get a quick coffee for half an hour or something, because and it'll be the same for you as it is for me in these prolific jobs. It's part of the duties of the role. It's not in the job description, but it is part of it. So it's just trying to get a place whereby you can be with everybody, but at the same time not feel that that the phone or the social media is impacting on your private life, and it's learning to manage it. And I try, sometimes successfully, sometimes terribly, but I do try and make sure those weekends bits are just, and okay, I just check it just to make sure I have a quick look to see if there's anything urgent. It takes a couple of minutes, and you can slip into the toilet cubicle to do that.
Secret phone checking.
In all honesty, there are places you can just slip off and have a quick check that nobody's distressed by the fact he's on his phone again. But
good stuff. All right, and then kind of looking ahead at the future, and obviously aspirations and goals for not just yourself, but more for children's services in general across your region and across the UK. What do you think those aspirations will turn into?
I guess it's funny, really. You could get quite altruistic by all of those sorts of things. It invites a question like that. If I cast my mind back to say, like, 2009, 10s, 11s, when local authorities were probably quite well resourced. Maybe we weren't as efficient in how we use that money or not. But I think if we took the learning through austerity, the way we've had to be innovative and creative in order to navigate through, if we could bring together a properly resourced children's services / public sector with that innovation, creativity, just imagine what we could do. I think we could do some absolutely incredible things in a way that's both efficient, effective, but more importantly would change lives in a way far more impactfully than we did before, because we probably squandered a bit of money, the truth be known. I think we've learned the power and importance and value of money in a way that we've probably not. So we could get that resourcing right, keep hold of our learned creativity and innovation in a way that we've probably not done previously. I just think the impact would be so much better for children, young people, because most children just need to be, and families, if you like, need to be better helped. most children don't need the protection, they just need family support, good
Yeah.
family support.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Thank you. And then I suppose finally, what advice would you give anyone who is a social care manager or has aspirations again of being a social care manager, who's thinking that one day they'd like to be you, or they'd like to be
Don't do it.
they'd love to be a director of children's services with everything that we've talked about that comes with it, the pressure, the responsibility, but also the positive impact, the amazing achievements, the real kind of amazing feeling that you must get on a day-to-day basis, that you are helping and changing lives and supporting young people. What advice would you give anyone who's thinking about that?
Oh goodness. I guess I think the first bit is, to be successful, you've got to accept this is, a life.
Mm,
It's not a job. And
yeah,
it means it's a decision you have to take with your family and partner,
yeah.
whatever your circumstances are, is because, as we've just talked about it, they will too be affected by what you do. And
Hmm.
if they don't support you in that, it's probably going to be an unhappy relationship, or things are going to go wrong.
Yeah,
So I think it's something your family have to decide with you.
yeah,
I'm blessed,
yeah.
and I've always been blessed. I mean, my family have always been behind me, even if they're irritated at time. And then in terms of achieving it, I think, is remain sighted on what we do affects children. So he's always been sighted on practice, individual children, um, and then start to challenge yourself and sort of create the opportunities. That bit of advice my mum gave to me as a child, in terms of being good on the practice, understanding performance, understanding the relationship between quality practice, performance, partnerships, vision, ambition, plans and directions,
Mm,
and seeking all those things out in terms of just, how can I learn a little different, how do I get better at this, and just hunting out those opportunities, because they are there in the bucketful.
mm,
And particularly as there's less resource around, means we've still got to do those things we need to do to innovate, to create, to be better,
mm,
um, which means those opportunities are there.
mm,
And then look after yourself,
yeah,
because it does, chip away at you, and you've got to really look after yourself.
yeah. I can imagine. Definitely, I've seen it myself with lots of senior managers that I've worked
Yeah.
with. How that toll of the role can take on people. But that's great. Thank you for explaining that. Well said, I think. And yeah, just really enjoyed speaking to you. It's kind of a pleasure to hear, in your own words, obviously, what being a DCS is like, and to see how the role is changing. And I think I'm just grateful that you're taking the time to do this. As I said, I hope it will showcase for some people who aren't, fully au fait with the role, and obviously what a DCS does, that, how it impacts the lives of vulnerable people and what you do, and your thought processes that you go through on a day-to-day basis. So thank you very much. I'm really
No,
grateful for that.
no, thanks, Sam. And maybe one of the things is the likes of me, as people are aspiring service, because we always do it at the aspirant stage, and we always do it at like the new Ds. Maybe there's something in that people, if that's your target group, is just
Mm.
having, like a chat in the cafe, where people just generally chat through,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
just a chat in the corridor, or a chat in a cafe,
Yeah,
or just, as you said, your story earlier about that young person, where just that one interaction makes a huge difference. I think that's the same with staff or people that you work with, or or colleagues. Just that sometimes that interaction, or that advice, or that kind of just a snippet, or just that little bit of information could send someone off in a different
yeah,
path
yeah,
completely. And
yeah,
just being able to pick someone's brain sometimes about the next step on within their career path, or the journey that they're on personally, is great to have someone around who can do that for them.
yeah, I
um,
would agree. And like I say, and I think as a profession, we're all by nature quite giving.
mm, yeah, Hugely. I've never met a social care manager who doesn't take the time to talk to you, who isn't always really interested in what you've got to say, even though they're hugely busy and their brain is running at 1,000,000 miles an hour. But they always take the time to listen, and they always take the time to respond. And I think
Yeah.
we're lucky that we work in such a rewarding sector, really, as social care.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I feel it every, various points in my time, and that goes back to your network stuff. I can remember at DCS, when I was appointed to DCS, I had a mentor appointed through ADCS. But I was blessed. My former DCS was always a trusted colleague. And then Alison, who was the president of ADCS at the time. And I remember when we were going through our inspection, and it's what we talked about before, I went to different people for different things.
Mm-hmm.
And I will
Yeah.
always remember a conversation. She'll never remember it, Alison, but I remember being on platform 3. I could even tell you within probably centimetres of where I stood,
Wow.
because the inspector had said something to me, and I was, brand new DCS, probably 18 months into the role, Manchester inspection, coming out of intervention, huge pressure. And the inspector said something to me, and I had that dread of panic, just the blood drained from my body.
I can imagine. Yeah.
I still had to keep an even platform for the staff and keep them set. And I got to the train station on the way home, and I rung Alison. We had a chat, and she just told me through something so basic that, and I knew. She said, this, Paul.
Yeah.
Just
You've
talk me
got this.
through. Yeah. And it was just something, and just a bit of advice, and I would always be eternally grateful. And she probably won't even remember it. And it's the same with kids. We give so much to each other because we do, never always conscious of the potential impact or what the impact was. And Alison, I've spoke to Alison once or twice, I think, since, but I don't think I've talked about that. But I'll be eternally grateful because she helped me through probably one of the most worrying parts. And it was a 5-minute conversation.
Yeah.
And I had it.
It made all the difference.
You had it. And for me, it just settled me back down again.
Yeah. And you kind of actually you just made me think of something else there, because when I am having conversations with people in social care, senior managers or people looking to move forward, one of the phrases that I hear a lot is imposter syndrome. From senior managers, it comes up all the time.
Yeah.
I'm not ready for this. How have I got this far? How am I doing this role? How am I living it when there's so many other people out there who could do this just the same or even better than me? Does that resonate with you at all?
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting, really, isn't it? Is that I always had that. I've always had that, actually.
Have you?
Because,
Yeah.
well, in lots of ways, because I think there's a bit of, it's probably tied a little bit into humility, isn't it? Probably, but I left school with nothing. Like I said, lots of good fun and lots of memories.
Great memories.
Oh God, yeah. But no qualifications to of any substance. I mean, I did have them, but they weren't really worth very much in the world of academia. Not like they certainly would do now. And I remember my first. I always used to go to my very first child protection conference, and it goes back to that conversation we just had. Is that people probably don't realise the profound impact they have. But I remember going to the child protection conferences. The designated doctor was there, and the named nurse for child protection was there, and they always ask these really clever questions. And I used to go back to my team manager, Anne, and she'd say, Paul, she says, nobody knows more about this family than you. There is nothing they could ask you that you wouldn't know.
Yeah.
But as a young social worker, and prior to this, as a soldier, in terms of confidence, self-confidence and belief, soldiering gives you that. And I always felt that, and it took me a while. And then, of course, following those conversations, then I started to realise that, dare I say, that they used to ask the same questions at every conference. But the point being is, you always felt everybody knows more than you, and everybody's better than you.
Yeah.
And that might be true, but if you get to these roles, or you get to your management role or your service lead roles, you've got I would like to think, on ability. And I think the only thing I could say in response to that is then you've got to have the courage of your conviction and self-belief. but be open to and listening to other people. Be receptive to the feedback.
Yeah.
You know, and I always say is you can't be as outspoken as I am without, you know, not being open to
Criticism.
people could, well, yeah, and challenge, you know,
Yeah.
is that, you know, none of us should be beyond reproach. And I often say out of a sentiment's wrong, but well, the sentiment's right, but you know, the words are probably wrong, is out of a good argument comes a good decision. And
Yeah.
if you're open to the discussion and you're open to challenge, on the whole, you should arrive at the right decision. Now, sometimes you may have to be a little bit autocratic and a little bit more directive depending on the circumstances, but generally speaking, you know, is a bit of belief in that where you've got to is on merit, and on that merit means that you've done some things right, but always be open to have people around and never ever get, if you like, your your mirrored image, the phrase, isn't it? You know, where you surround yourself by like-minded people, because that's not good.
No.
And I'm constantly challenged. I mean, I work with a fabulous team. What I say is it's like a team of thoroughbreds. They really challenge me all the time. It's true. But they're super brilliant. But if you want a team like that around you, that means you've got to be open to be challenged. You know, that they are not going to be yes people. I can tell you that, in fact, they're not.
No.
But we do some fabulous stuff because they're talented, brilliant people in their own rights. Collectively, I think we're probably one of the most stable teams in the Northwest. Been together probably as a team 4, 5, 6 years in our
Must be
world.
doing something right. Must be doing something right.
Well, I like to think so. And I'm blessed, you know. I do think that, you know. But I've always felt I've worked with good teams.
But also sometimes the fact that you're open to that, you know, some people are just not open to that, being challenged by their colleagues or being challenged by, you know, managers that aren't as senior as them, or managers that aren't on the same level as them. So the fact that you're open to that, and the fact that you know, you welcome it, is great, because people around you must feel comfortable then that they can do that, know that they can challenge you in a positive way, in a constructive way. And as you say, a discussion will come from it, and maybe something better will come from that discussion, or even that argument sometime, that will make headway, or will move things forward.
Absolutely. I didn't say I welcome it.
Yeah, I put it with it, but I don't welcome it, and yeah, not going to advocate it from absolutely everyone on a day-to-day basis. But yeah, the fact that you're open to that is great, because that just means you're prepared for that challenge, and you know, people feel comfortable around people who are prepared for that, aren't they?
Yeah, well, I think so. I just think I really value, you know, and I always try and make sure that everybody's got a contribution. And one of the things that I've always never been is hierarchical. Therefore, you know, because I've got the most senior role means I must know everything. It's actually probably the furthest from the truth. And I think it's probably one of those bits around is critical to the role and its success, is being able to build team. And building a team that's functional, that play together, that work together, you know. And you know, it's really, really important, you know. So we don't do loads of social stuff, but sometimes we had a stage when we were in intervention, we used to have, like, it was the Monday morning meetings, because where we were in Manchester in intervention, we had to move at pace, so it was very directive in lots of ways. And every Monday morning we went through things in a laborious, painful way, you know. But what we did was, and we took it from the restorative approach, was circle discussions, you know. We did the circles. To the point is, actually, we don't do them on a Monday morning now, we do them on Fridays. And where we've got like a bit of an issue whereby we just need the space and time to work it through, we'll put an hour and a half aside, and we have a discussion and agree some broad principles, and we work collectively to solve the problem and agree on key actions. We do it less these days, but at one point we use that time, because they're always in the diaries, so it's in everybody's diary. If you don't use it, you don't use it. If we've got something, it's in our diaries. Sometimes we've even just gone for a coffee and just chatted and caught up. And it took a while for the team to give themselves permission, because you kind of feel that I've always got to be doing emails, I've always got to be doing a meeting, because that's what.
Yeah.
But sometimes what you've got to do is just give yourself some time to think
Yeah.
and build your relationship with your colleagues, because we work with such great people. So we do all that, but that's a Friday mornings from 8:30 till usually about 10 o'clock is in the diary. Sometimes we have an item to go through, sometimes we don't. Sometimes anyone want to go for a coffee, and it's all okay, because it's all work,
Yeah.
networking, relationships
Yeah,
building,
it's
whatever
still
you want to
working.
wrap it up at.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
some people respond better around a boardroom table or in an office. Some people
Yeah.
respond better in a coffee shop, just being a bit more relaxed in the conversation. You can get the best of people in different scenarios or different situations, can't you? With the same, with still, kind of the end result.
Yeah, the best gift we have is time, and we can give each other time. It's interesting actually, because one of the things you didn't ask is leading, if you like, social care and education, because they are very, very different creatures. Educationalists need a different approach to social work, and they're both driven by different things, albeit the intended outcome is the same. And as a rule of thumb, my experience tells me educationalists need more time to debate and discuss. And if you think about it, they've come through an education route, which is part of education is reflection, articulation and all that. Social care tends to be reflective in its own right, but it's very action-based. Right, just tell me what you want to do, right, and I'm on with it.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, really. And what was the nicest thing when we did an annual conversation with Ofsted, and this was the census team, and we all chatted afterwards. Some of the education colleagues responded to what was a social care question. Question
Okay.
come out social, because we worked so well together. I can't remember what it was, but I remember a member of the team come back and said, "God, how good was that we were able to answer the social care question?"
That's
and
great.
you forget it's very subtle. That you couldn't write that on paper, but that sense of team. But yeah, fortunate.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like they're all in sync with each other when you get to that level that, people are open and they're happy to discuss things in front of other, other colleagues about different sectors. So it sounds like you've got them into a great place.
Yeah, I'd like to think so, but they're a great bunch of people as well. It
starts with the people, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So good stuff. All right. Well, thank you, Paul. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. For probably the best start to a Monday to a week that I've probably had in years. Actually,
it's the technology work. That's the main thing, isn't it? The technology worked, and
I'm renowned for being miserable on a Monday morning. Actually, I hate Mondays, and I've always hated Mondays. Some of the team have refused to meet with me, not in Manchester previously, when I've had to realise don't do team meetings. Said Paul, you can physically see your spirit lift as the day progresses. But this morning I've worked from home, so I've been to the gym, and obviously a conversation with you has just been a great start to the day, to be honest.
And this is a series of conversations that we're going to have with, a corporate director of children's and adult services, like you say, a chief executive, because I think it just lifts the lid on, it lifts the lid on that. And some people might look at it and, whether they're inside of social care or outside, and go, okay, that resonates with me, or I get it now. I've always wondered how that works. And there's a lot of things that person has said really resonate with me. And, I didn't realize that's how they felt about it, or those are maybe the reason why they've made those decisions. But now I kind of understand.